podcast, talk about this issue and you know, talk about what we can do to help and what we can do from this point forward to help, you know, progress. So just a quick introduction. We've got Tina Zaman, who is a stand-up comedian and the producer, CEO of you know, Type Comedy, which is a comedy production that promotes people of color here. She originally from America, but is now living here in Australia. Welcome, Tina Zaman.
Hey.
We've also got Dalara Williams, who is an Indigenous Australian, an actor and a writer based here in Sydney. Would like to welcome you both to the podcast. This is something that's been happening for years, and the discrimination and the oppression against Black people in the United States has been such a prominent thing. And Tina, I know you can help me with the history of this. It's crazy. I was watching or rewatching sitcoms that I used to watch as a kid, something like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right? And they touched on these social issues. There was an episode where Fresh Prince, like Will Smith and Carlton, were driving to, I think it was the Bahamas, or not Bahamas. They were driving to somewhere, and they got pulled over. Palm Springs. Yeah, and they got pulled over by police. And the way that the scene played out was Carlton was the ignorant one. He was like, "Oh, you know, the police are here to help us," and Will was the commentary of what Black people experience when it comes to dealing with police.
I think that when we're talking about American history, US history, we need to keep in mind that we're talking about 400 years of Black death. And we're Black deaths because slavery is an example of a total institution. So even though the modern form of it is prison, it's a situation in which there's a controlling authority inside the system that gets to decide everything that happens in that system. And that means that they have the power to cover up and sanction death and murder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things as well, even though slavery was abolished, and the date escapes me right now, but even though slavery was
1865.
abolished. Thank you. Thanks, Tina. Yeah, and even though slavery was abolished, there's still systems in place that hinder Black people from, you know, building wealth and building, you know, lives. And it's crazy that that's something that still exists.
I think that, yeah, when we talk about Black deaths in the United States, we need to be conscious of the history of lynching, and what is happening now is just a continuation of lynching and modern day lynching, which back in the day of slavery, they were public, and there were photos taken and made into postcards. So, you know, and then now that slavery is supposedly abolished, so the 13th Amendment, which Ava DuVernay made a movie about, or a web series about, is the amendment to the Constitution that states that slavery is abolished unless somebody is a convicted criminal. So once they're a convicted criminal, you can have them not just make number plates, but do whatever you want. I mean, California firefighters are often prisoners, and they fight fires, and then when they come out of prison, they have a record, so they can't actually be firefighters outside of prison. So it's a total institution. Other examples of a total institution are mental hospitals and the police.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for a bit of context, a lynching is hanging someone.
A lynching can be any racially motivated killing.
Yep.
It is generally in the context of the United States reserved for Black people that are trying to escape slavery.
Right. This is really heavy.
I know. I think some people are gonna. Yeah. I think it's really. I just want to emphasize right now that I feel very lucky to be a creative at this moment. And,
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you have been catching up with other creatives, but I think it's really important to take care of yourself. If you can get therapy, please do that. And this is a critical time where we're all exhausted and trying to analyze and feel and communicate. And people are, sometimes some of our messages are unclear because we are so emotionally flooded. So just to, I'm a creative that really believes in the power of taking care of our mental health, even though it's difficult to ask for help. Just want to give a shout out to Dawn for asking for help to getting this Zoom link, because that is the hardest thing to do when you're a producer, to ask for help, because usually you can do everything yourself. Usually.
Thanks, Thea.
Love it.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that there's so much in the US, but we are also struggling with what's been happening here in Australia, with the Dalara, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Do you want to give us a little bit of context for that?
Yeah, it's very similar to obviously what's happening in the US, but because Australia itself is such a new country, it was like officially a federation state in 1901.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the history of the treatment of Aboriginal people, we weren't included in the census, also considered as citizens, until 1967. And so these are all very new. So as Aboriginal people have only been considered citizens for 52 years.
Yeah.
And so this is not something that's happened hundreds of years ago. It's my grandmother was 18 when she was then considered in the census. And it is the whole thing of just being a sort of control of Indigenous lives. And just like the US, there are these institutions that are put in place. Aboriginal people only make up 2.8% of the population of Australia. The population of Australia is about 24 million.
Yeah.
And Aboriginal people occupy 30% of prisons. In Northern Territory, the juvenile detentions were 100% of Indigenous kids.
Yeah.
So it's not just starting new of institutionalizing Aboriginal people, it's starting at the age of 10, where being convicted of that and gone to juvenile detention. And so that's sort of starting off in a lot of, like I said, that was in Northern Territory. As a fight of death in custody in the march yesterday, there was a death in custody in WA that same day.
During the marches, during the protests?
So while we're protesting, there was a death in custody that happened in
WA.
Western Australia.
Yeah.
So there is this continuous fight and to have a voice, and it starts with learning the true history of Australia.
Yeah.
That I think that's a lot of one of the only things a lot of Aboriginal people are just wanting is for people to understand and learn what has happened in Australia, because it isn't taught in our school system.
The Aboriginal people are the true owners of this land, but then got taken away from them.
It's and it wasn't just by accident, it was military as well. So a lot of people sort of in that whole scheme of Australia being discovered were a place for the convicts. They were actually supposed to go to America, but America at the time was going through the revolution, and so the British Empire was going to lose a colony, which was the Americas. And so they had to find another place to put their convicts. So this is all planned out. They had to search for another place and then came across Australia.
Yeah.
And what they've learned about colonizing the Americas, they then modified it to get to Australia. So Australia is the only country in the Commonwealth that doesn't have a treaty with their Indigenous people.
Yeah.
And you can see all the countries that are under the Commonwealth. Australia isn't one of them. And they learned that through previous places they conquered.
Yeah.
And that's just a simple rule of terra nullius. If you don't terra nullius, it sort of translates to land belonging to no one. And that's sort of what they came, and they used that to claim the land, to say that we didn't have the systems in place as sort of westernized cultures, such as agricultural farmlands, even though we had, but it's not, in their eyes it wasn't.
It's like it's become the norm when it shouldn't be. And the issue is lack of information. So just to bring up the point that Tina brought up with the 13th, the Netflix documentary, you've heard about slavery, you've heard about, police brutality. It almost becomes so normal, like school shootings. You just, another one. When it first happens, like, whoa, that's messed up. But then you start seeing it more and more. You kind of like, oh, well, that's fucked up. That's just how it is over there. But with what's happening with the police brutality, because of the lack of information and just it happening again, I'm not like, I don't know if it's wrong to say this, but some people just sort of like, that's just fucked up, and nothing happens from it. But then that documentary, I watched that yesterday because right after the protests here in London, I was just triggered because the moment all this stuff was happening, it really got everyone to pay attention, And while you sort of know, like, I've known about this stuff and I thought I'm on the right side of this because I care about it. Only with this happening and really watching that documentary on Netflix, I was like, no, this is fucked up. I can't just be not saying anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's not enough to just say, I care about it. If you really have a conscience, if you really look into it. And I think what Dalara is saying with Australia, like, it was such a new country. We know about hints of it. You see it on the news or you hear people talk about it. But I don't know if it's like until we get a Netflix documentary in Australia to actually cover it, because it's so well done. Like, it just has it there. Like, the information's out there if you really look for it. But with like social media, with how things are put together, how information is accessed, I think there's somewhat of a turning point. There's a bit more of a, like, it's gaining traction. And I just wanted to share that. Like, that I really recommend that documentary, and I wish there was something like that, because what Dalara just mentioned there, I'm on the same boat as Raf. I'm like, we live in Australia, and I don't.
Sort of documentary series on SBS called The First Australians.
Yeah.
It's about, I don't know how many episodes, but what it takes you through the history of Aboriginal Australians from first contact, from 1788 through, and I think the last one is about Mabo, and we just had obviously a reconciliation week, which tops and tails. Mabo Day was just on the 3rd of this month, which he, if you don't know about it, it is he sort of claims native titles. So the hardest thing for Aboriginal people to claim native title is that you have to prove a continuous cultural practice on that land. And it's hard because a lot of Aboriginal people got removed from their land and put on reservations. And so that was broken. And so you have to go to the courts. And so he went to the courts and fought to say that that land up in Torres Strait Islanders was traditionally his, passed down from his father.
Rightfully Indigenous, yeah.
But yeah, it's a great, they sort of simplify a lot. But the thing is, I understand that it is overwhelming, these types of conversations, but the conversations that need to happen.
Yeah.
And it's not, you're not going to learn it overnight. And like a lot of things I've learned, obviously being in the situation, but it's years and years of learning and being active. I'm sort of comparing it to people that want to go to the gym. You don't go once and then you get results today.
Yeah.
It's just commitment through learning. and educating yourself through documentaries, films, reading materials, across all that. But if you have such a high interest in it, it's gonna sink in more than when a lot of people don't want to hear it. It just sort of goes through one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
But you're gonna then find a lot more material associated with that.
Yeah.
I know that John Pilger's got a documentary called Utopia. I think he's the one that did that one. But that's a really good documentary to watch. It's done by a white man. I think it'd be great. I mean, there's so many great Aboriginal creatives out there doing great stuff already. But that's a documentary that comes to mind.
Yeah.